Okay, so we're going to continue with the news site saga, for better or worse, for the challenge. And the challenge is, we've started to get introduced to React Router. So I'm going to give another lecture, which so do a little demo app which uses React Router and then also makes uh, a third party API call to get information. So this is something, I've you guys have seen both of these things before, but it's good to see them again because it's going to be something you have to do in your both personal and group projects. All right, so I got the default create React app thing going, so I can take a look here. There's nothing, I haven't done anything yet. I'm going to go into app.js and look at this, and I'll do the usual just to mark a component for now as I'm developing. So I'll cd into big news and then npm start. So this is going to be, the API I'm going to use is going to be a news API. So I can just show that to you real quick. So I basically did a random search, and this is a free one. This requires an API key, as most of them do. So I'm gonna do that. So I just signed up, created an account, and I didn't have to give them my credit card information or anything, but I get like 1,000 API calls a month, something like that. So hopefully I don't run out during the example. Okay, so news API, this will give you some stuff. We'll take a look at that in more detail later. Okay, so I should have my application running, and I'm going to open up the DevTools. The React DevTool, so just the app. So that's the only component I have. So I'm going to try to design this similarly to what we have before. So we're going to have a few different components. We're going to have a nav component, which is just going to be nothing. It's going to be a dummy thing. And then at the same level as the app component is where we're going to put all of our routes. So we're going to have a bunch of other components that we want to render depending on what's happening here. So in let's say a classical web application, if I go to localhost /3000/ users, what I'm actually doing, this is not going to, you can ignore what's actually displaying here, but this would make another request to the server, right? Which would be so this address would be resolved through DNS, and that would make a network request to some server somewhere on the internet, and then that server could take a look at the request using anything, but especially the URI, and pull that information out, and then send a new HTML JavaScript document back to the users. And if I want to slash, instead of /users /blog, then I would make another request to that same server, and then I would get another HTML document back. The ideal for React is to have what's called a single page app, which means, so there are additional complications. There's something called server side rendering, and there's other things, but the basic idea is that you get that initial application, right? So you write your React application here, you build it, which we haven't really done yet, but you'll run this command and you'll build it, and it's going to create basically a HTML, JavaScript, CSS bundle that will then get sent to the user. So if I go to whatever this application is, I get this this bundle, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and then that's it. That's kind of I have it, and then everything I do is just controlled locally using JavaScript and everything else. So if I go to /users, I'm not actually going to make a new request to that server to get a new HTML document. It's just basically like clicking a button or something. So I can conditionally change what I'm displaying based on what's happening here. So this basically just becomes like an event. So it's an event or a change that I can listen to, and my application can react to that change and display something new. So the routing is kind of fake, basically. It's not fake in a bad sense, but you know, it keeps the same user interface, but it's doing something a little different under the hood. Okay, so instead of app here, I'm gonna have this be a mock. Well, I'll go ahead and make some components here. So within source, add a little bit of organizational structure here. I'll have nav.js. And I'm gonna just do functional components here. So this is the shortcut. This is just laziness. You don't have to do this. Nav. And then I will return just the notional nav component. And then to actually use that here, so I'm going to import this. Oops. So import nav from ./components/nav. And now I can, let's see. Not sure why that would be. There we go. Okay, so I have two components now. I have this app component, and then I have this nav component. So this would be, you know, this would have links in it and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to build that out. But yeah, so that'll be a dummy stand-in. Then what I want is, so I want, for example, I'll just get rid of the app. So what I want is for this nav component, like wherever I am in my application, I want that nav bar to stay there, basically. So you don't have to do it, you don't have to design it that way, but that's often, you know, how things are done. There's kind of like a border, which could include a header and a footer, maybe like sidebars as well, which doesn't change at all. And then the stuff in the middle changes depending on user actions. So we have this component and it's not going to change, but the rest of the application, so we're going to have news articles, so we're going to have a list view and a detail view. So that is going to change based on what happens in the URL bar here. So anything that's going to change based on what's happening in the URL needs to be wrapped in these other components. And we're going to get those other components from React Router. So I was looking at this this week, and it looks like they have another update. It's a minor version update, but looks pretty significant. So I'm going to use the slightly older stuff, which will still work with the current version. But just so you know, this is a typical React kind of thing. It's very, you know, it changes rapidly. So React itself is constantly being updated and changed, and then the kind of third-party ecosystem follows suit. Okay. Close that. So what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to have to install, let's see, where's the installation instruction here? Tutorial. Let's see, I think that tells you, yeah, so npm install React Router DOM. So I will install that. make sure I'm in the same level as my package.json. Okay, so I look at my package.json, I now have React router DOM. So now I can use these other components that I'm going to get for free here. So I'm going to import some stuff. A lot of this is just going to be boilerplate, so I'll just show you. There's a few different kinds of routers. I'm going to use browser router, and then routes from React router DOM. Okay, and then so this is going to be a hierarchy of components that we're going to have to create. So browser router will be the top level one, and then you'll have routes inside of the browser router, and then you'll have your individual routes inside of the routes. So any component, so I'm going to have a list view for articles and a detailed view for articles and anything else that I want to be controlled by what happens in the URL. I'm going to put inside of this. So nav, I want it to be outside, so I'll leave that there. Browser router. Okay, and then within the browser router, I'm going to add routes. Just kind of boilerplate I'm going to have to do. And then what I actually care about are my individual, individual routes here. And individual route, you can have a route inside of another route, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. So I'm just going to make all of these independent routes, and a route needs a couple things. So it needs a component. Let me see, what's the field? Yeah, it needs a path and an element. So the path is going to be the pattern, like the URL pattern. So I go to /users. That's what the pattern is going to be. And I think I'll just leave this like that for now. And then there's also the element, and the element is going to be another component. So this is a component that you want to render when someone goes to this route. And so we're going to have to write that component. So let's go here. So I'll say that instead of nothing, I'm just going to leave. Yeah, I'll just make a dummy component for this. I'll call it home. To home. And then I want to import this. And then, so I just throw that in there. So home. I'm going to run the server. Start. Okay, so this looks the same, but if you'll notice why the dev tools are so helpful, there's a lot more happening here. So I'm not going to talk about what providers are. So we'll get to the context API, which is a more advanced and basically optional topic. But when you use third-party components, they often will use stuff like this. So you can ignore it. But the important part is I have this routes thing and router and browser router. So this is the outer component on the same level as nav. So let me see. Who should be?
Is it hash instead of pattern? That's what we did the other day inside the route.
Here, like a hashtag.
Yeah, is it path, not pattern?
Oh, you're right. It is. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So here we have the home component being rendered. So we can ignore all of this other stuff. We have nav, we have our browser router. So anything that's going to be, again, anything that's going to be affected by what's happening here, you can throw that in. If I do this, then I'm not going to get anything. All right, so we'll go back to the base route. We're showing our home page here, and then let's add another route. So we want to have a route where we can kind of list. So we'll just do articles. And then the element is going to be article list, which we haven't created. So let's go create that component. And just to mark it right now, I'm going to add this fragment because I know I'm going to probably have some more stuff in there. H2. And then I'm going to import that here. All right. So now if I go to slash articles, I get the articles list components. So this is just, React is paying attention to what's happening here, and then it's changing, it's changing what happens based on that. So just like if you had a search form and you had an event listener and you changed the state, which re-rendered a component, it's kind of the same thing. Same idea. Okay, so I have this articles page, and now I want to render a list of articles. But I need to get those articles from a third-party API somewhere. So what kinds of things, so this is a pattern that we've seen a few times. So what kinds of things am I going to need to do if I want to get articles from a third party and then render those articles?
Have to fetch.
Yep. So I'm going to have to fetch. Where should I do that fetching?
Use effect.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Use effect. Yeah. So I can't just like fetch the articles whenever I want. I have to follow React's rules. It has a particular, call them hooks or life cycle events or whatever you want to call them, but there are a series of events or function calls that React is going to make, and you can kind of piggyback onto those and do certain things at certain times. And use effect is one of those hooks. So import use effect from React. So inside of use effect, so when do we want? So okay, first off, what does use effect take as parameters?
Callback function and the what's it called? The parameter list.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, the dependency list or dependency array or something like that, which is optional. So you can have nothing there. You can have an empty array. You can have array with stuff in it. So what's the difference between use effect with no second parameter and an empty list and then a list with something in it?
So no second parameter will execute every single time there's a new render. And then
Yep.
if there is an empty list, then it'll execute every time, or it'll execute only on the first render. And if there's something in the list, it'll execute only when that specific object re-renders.
Yeah, exactly. So you almost never want to do this because this will get called anytime. So what things can trigger a re-render?
Change in state.
Yep. Okay. So within this component, if I have state and I change that state, then the component will re-render. That's one thing. Is there any other way to get React to re-render a component? So the other way is if the props change. So in this case, we're not passing down props to this component, but if we were, if those props change, that would also trigger a re-render here. So if you want use effect, if you want this, whatever function you pass to this to run anytime the props change, anytime this component state changes, and on the initial render, then you would do this. But that's almost never what you want. Okay, so in our case, we're making an API call. So we just want to get some initial data. So the first time the component loads, we want to grab some data and then render a bunch of articles. So that pattern is this. So you have an empty dependency array because we just want it to run on that first render. Okay, so within here and use effect, there's a let's say a restriction or hiccup where I can't make this an asynchronous function. So I need to fetch some data from a third-party API, which means that I'm going to use promises because that's just how it is. So this is going to be an asynchronous function, meaning it's going to return a promise. So I have to define that promise. I have to define that function separately within here, and then I will kind of define it here and call it here. So async function get articles. You can call this whatever I want, but I'm getting articles, so that makes sense. And then I'll just call it so I don't forget. Get articles. Actually, I'm gonna not call that right now because I don't want to waste API calls while I'm developing. Okay, so get articles, and then I'm gonna do const. So my initial result, await. I have to make sure to use await. So this is marked as a promise. And fetch. And then where am I going to go? Well, I have to go look at my API documentation here. So there are some examples. So there's a couple different endpoints. This is more or less arbitrary, but the way this works is you make a GET request to this base endpoint, and then you can pass it some key value pairs, including the API key. So I'll just copy this right here. And I'm going to use backticks because I know I'm going to add something else here. Okay. So I get the headlines, but I also need to pass this API key. So blah, 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 question mark. So this is a query parameter, and then these key value pairs. So I'm going to need the API key. So API key equals, and then what is that going to be equal to? So I got an API key, so I'll just grab that from over here. So what I could do is just throw that. So this is, you know, obviously this is a credential, so you don't want it exposed, but this is temporary for me, so it's fine. So you can just throw that in there, but you don't really want to do that because then anyone who's using your app can see that, and you don't want to push it up. You don't want to commit that to your repo. So you know, anytime you use something like this, you want this to happen on the server side, so the user isn't doesn't have access to these credentials. But at a minimum, you don't want to commit it to your public GitHub repo. So one thing you can do here is add an environment file. So .env. We've seen this before with Python. It's the same pattern. And then we give it a. I'm just going to copy this. So if you look at the React documentation, I don't think we strictly speaking need to do this, but this is just something for when React builds the application, it will pay attention to this. So this is just something I got from the React documentation, but in general, you have you know, your key here, the variable name, and then you have whatever the secret is, or in this case it's the secret, but it could be, you know, some kind of configuration or whatever. So one thing to keep in mind is that this should not be in quotes, so you just kind of as is plop it down there in the .env file. And then you also need to make sure that you're not pushing up your .env file. So by default, React for some reason doesn't have just a plain .env in the git ignore, so you'll have to add that. Okay, and then once I have that, so if I push up this to GitHub now, this credential is not going to be exposed there. So to actually access that, Node has a way to do that, and that's process.env, and then whatever the key is that you gave it. So in that case, it's this. Yeah.
Is the name of that key just whatever we want to give it, or does it have to follow a certain convention?
I believe the documentation said that when the project gets built, it's going to look for you know, React app. So your key should start with React _app_ and then whatever else you want to call it.
Would we ever have two API keys in there? I guess that's why I was asking that. What do we do if we had multiple keys? Or
Oh, you just rename it. So this would be, you know, you just give it a more specific name.
oh, that's okay. That's what I was wondering. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, this part, the first part is so any environment variable has to start with React app, and then this is whatever you want it to be.
That's what I should have asked. Sorry, that's what I was trying to get at. So it's kind of like test, and unit test has to start with something. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you push this to production though, and that env file is not present, how does it get that key, right? Because it's going to be looking for it, but the file's not there.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So when this gets built, it will one of the reasons you have to follow this convention is because when it actually gets built, you package it up, it will have access to this.
But not in plain text where people can see the key.
Yeah, so that's there's also I mean, there's another security issue, which is, you don't want, as it is right now, this key would be, hard to find, but this key would be available to the user. So if they inspected this, and where would this be? But anyway, yeah, there are ways, because you're actually just sending an HTML document, right? So there would be a way to pull this out. So you would ideally really want to have this server side. So any credential like that, you would want to have server side so that users don't have access to it.
Yeah, because wouldn't you be able to see it in the network when you inspected that on?
Yeah, exactly, because it's also a query parameter. So this is like not exactly what you want to do, but I also don't want to make it too complicated. And there is, adding this .env file is a layer of security. So it's not perfect, but it's something.
Hey, Chad. So if we were to do that, I know it's not called fetch in Python, but if we were to do that GET request in Django and then store the key in the .env, that would be far more secure.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you would want to actually have the credentials on your Django backend, because the Django API backend doesn't directly, like, no user has direct access. That's in a server somewhere that you control, and people shouldn't be able to access it. People shouldn't be able to SSH into that without a private key.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, I mean, security makes everything a lot more complicated. The web would be much simpler without it. But so this is one level of security where we're putting our credential in a .env file so that it's not available on GitHub. The next level is, depending on what you're doing, if you have an important credential, you want to try and put it on your on a backend server. So the front end makes a request to the backend, maybe with like a token, like a user token, like a JSON web token or something. And that server can know that the user is authorized and then make whatever request, on behalf of that user. So the backend would actually be making this request. But for the sake of showing the example and everything, so this fetch would really be to your Django backend. You would make a request to, like, blah blah blah, my Django backend / all articles, and then that would make a request that would go through the URL router on the Django backend, which would ultimately call a view, and then in that view, you would have that view make the request to this actual endpoint with this actual credential. It would get the data back and then send it back to this user here.
So we're just learning this now just to know how to do it, but we're not actually going to do it like this.
Yes and no. So you would be making a request to your Django API here. So that, and you would do that so that you don't need this credential. You don't need that credential.
Okay, I get it.
From the front end request, but you would still be making a request to the back end. Sorry, I know this is a little confusing. If you're not worried about security, then this doesn't matter. But yeah, so this would, in your real application, this will be a request to your Django backend that you control, and then that Django backend would actually make this literal request right here.
Got it. And I feel like you already said that, but now it just clicked.
No, it's confusing, and I'm kind of doing one thing and saying something slightly different, so it's confusing. But the focus, just so you know, one reason I'm doing it this way is because we're trying to just focus on React right now. So so I'm taking some shortcuts just to focus on this particular aspect of React. But when you're practicing, as you're writing web app, as long as you're not deploying this and making it publicly labeled, then this is fine. And using the .env to prevent your credential from being stored on GitHub is fine. So as you're doing local development, this kind of stuff is fine. Okay, cool. So I am going to make this request with my credential, and then so initially this is going to parse the headers basically, and I'm going to parse the body, so res.json, and this should give me the actual contents that I care about here, and I could just try console.log. So now I'll call this. And I save this. So I have this promise, so I forgot, as usual, to add a wait here. API key invalid. Huh. Let me try. So I have this in Postman right here. That is working. One sec here.
My console shows it pulling the API key equals undefined. So I don't know if it's reading it correctly.
Yeah. Let's see. React app API key. Let me try displaying this real quick. I think I had to restart the server after I do that. Let me try that. Okay. So I just had to restart the server so that this gets picked up. All right. I'll try that one more time. Parameter missing. Okay. So this is an error. So I am making the request properly, but it's the API is telling me that my request is not formatted correctly. So this message is actually pretty helpful. So I can see, please set any of blah, blah, blah. It was cut off, but so I need to set another parameter. So I'm just going to do country equals US and this other thing. So hopefully that will do it. and I get back a successful result. So I should have all the articles that I need. So the object itself has, has a key called articles, which is an array of article objects. So I have access to all these articles. So how do but that's kind of just sitting here now. So how do I actually render those articles?
Would you set them to state? Set them using state?
Exactly. So we have something that has changed, right? So we have the initial render, and then we have some information which is new, which is all these articles. So if we have something that changes, we need to put that in state. So use state. And it's going to be all the articles. So articles, and then set articles. Use state. And then I'll give this a default value as a list or an array because the articles are that. All right. So instead of just console logging here, now I'm going to do set articles, and that will be body.articles. So this should be a list of articles, and I will check the dev tools to make sure that that is properly there. Let's see here. Yeah, the dev tools are a little wonky, but articles list, and I can see in my articles list component that the state exists, and I have all these articles. So it looks like my request is working. I'm getting the articles. I'm setting that properly. So now what I need to do is render all of those articles. I'm gonna comment this out. And then to do that, I basically need to turn this list of articles into JSX, right? So an array of, instead of an array of articles, an array of JSX. So let's do create. And I'm going to make these teaser components. So this is the list view, and then we'll have a way to go to the detail view later. Oops. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to map over all these articles. And for each article, I want to return a component, which will be a teaser. So I need to create that component. And then let's say, so this is gonna, I'll add a fragment here so I can wrap this up. So we'll have, say, an H3, and that will be something, and then P. So this will be like the title, and this will be the, say, the author. Okay, so I have this teaser component, which I want to show up here. So I'm going to import that. Let's do import teaser. I have a teaser here, and the teaser, I want it to have a couple pieces of information. Let me just check here. So I have access to, is author always null? No, okay. So author and title. So I can do author equals a dot author, and then title equals a dot title. And then if I go here, so my teaser component is now getting, what are these things called?
Those are props.
Yeah, exactly. So they're getting props. So how do I use props in this component?
I think you bring it in the function and then you say props.title, props.author.
Yep, so I could do that, props. So now I'm just making sure that I'm grabbing whatever I'm getting passed in, props dot title and props dot author.
Have an array. Is it an array? Oh, you set props to a, I forgot, but you can bring them all in that way.
Yes, so there's two ways to do this. One, excuse me, I have the, like the whole props object here. I can also, since I don't need everything, or don't necessarily need everything, I can destructure the props as they're coming in. So title, author, as long as I use the keys here, and then I can just refer to them like this. So that will work just the same. So let's finish wiring this up. So I have this function which now will, based on the state, so based on these articles, we'll create a whole bunch of teaser components. And then I can render that here. I can do create article teasers. Why is that not?
Should it have
Is it the
that
brackets?
GS yet? GAS.
G8, what was
Oh,
that?
like grab the create article teaser, like with the
It needs those
curly
squigglies.
bracket.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I have all of these. I'm not sure. Is that actually getting called? Okay. All right, so I have my nav component, and then inside here, under articles, I have all of these teaser components. So now, based on what's in state, I'm displaying a whole bunch of these articles. Okay, so now what I would like to do, so this is the list view. What I would like to do is to be able to click on an article and then go, go to a detailed view. So in articles will be article / whatever, and then in here I click it and I just see that particular article. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to need is a link. So this is just regular H3, but I want to make this like an A tag, basically. So I could do that myself. I could make this an A tag, but React Router DOM has a component, has a link component, which is easy to use. So we'll use that. So import link from React Router DOM. And I'm just going to make this a link. And then this needs a 2. So question is, what should this link to? So like if this were the, our initial go at Django, we would do, we would use like the article ID or something like that. So we'd go to /article ID. I'll just make this 5 or something. For now, I'll just hard code that. And the other, so if I hover over this, you can see that it creates an A tag, which goes to article /5. So this is hard coded right now, so all of them have that same link. And also, if I actually go to articles /5, there's nothing there because my router does not handle, it only handles articles. So I need to create another route for the detail view. And I can do articles / and then I can use this syntax. And then I can give it a name, which I'll be able to use later. So now I have this other path, just like Django URLs, where I can have access to a variable. So whatever the user types in or whatever gets inputted here, I can grab using this ID variable. Okay, but I'm not going to render the articles list anymore. I want to render a detail, an article detail. So I have to create that component. So I go here, article detail, JS. And then here, just for an initial run, H2. I'm going to save that. And then let's see. I'll make this. So this got imported here. And so if I go to /article /5, I now get the actual article detail view. This is refresh that one more time. So here's the actual detail component. So it's paying attention to this now. But that's not really enough. So that's, I have the initial route set up, so it's prepared to access this. So, but one question is, in the, let's see. Well, one question will be, how do I actually access this this value? So in the teaser here, sorry, into broken on the barriers. 1 second. Okay, so you can actually grab this value using another hook that React Router DOM makes available to you. So I will include that here. So import, it's called use params from React Router DOM, and I can just grab that here. So anytime this renders, it's going to have access to what's in the URL. And then I can actually grab that here. So I'm instead of title, I could do title. Let's see. I'll add another one here. P. This is the teaser. Actually, I'm going to need it in the detail view, not there. So I put this in the article detail. We'll have to add this guy. Okay, so that should work now. And you can see that this 5, so if I change this to 7, that will also show up there. And this hook, you can see this hook in the DevTools, params, context, matches, blah, blah, blah. So that's a way that we can dynamically get, so if we need to make another request to our API endpoint to get a particular article. So we're going to imagine that, you know, from one API we get like all these teasers or basic information about an article, and then we have to make another request to get the full article. That's not really the case here, but we're going to pretend that that's the case. So we're going to, once we are in the detail view, we're going to need to make another API request. So just like we did here, we're going to make another request. So following that same pattern, we know we're going to need use effect, and we know that we're going to need state. Import use effect, use state from React. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we got this. So let's go ahead and do use effect. You know, it's going to take a function. And I think we just, at the moment, at least, we just want it to make that fetch on the initial render. So let's write get article. And then article list, I'm going to comment this out for now. Start the server. Just want to make sure I'm not going to lose my API key while I'm doing this. Should be fine, but being paranoid. All right, so let's see here. All right, so I also want to do something a little. So I don't actually have IDs. These articles don't have IDs, which is a little annoying. So we're going to have to, we can either give them arbitrary IDs, or we can do some kind of janky slug thing, which is what I'm going to do. So we'll do some kind of slug thing. So the links will link to like the article based on the title. It'll be a URL safe, mostly safe slug. And then when we actually make the article detail view, the call there will add a query parameter that will search for the title. So it's not it's a little janky. So ideally you'd want some specific, you know, a unique identifier from the database, so you can make sure you get that, but we'll just kind of pretend. This API doesn't work that way, but I want to make the two API calls. So we'll search based on the title, so we can hopefully pull just one article. Okay, so going back here to the app, we have our nav component, which should always be displayed. And then we have all of the components which will be affected by what's in the URL. So we have the home, which is just kind of there to be there. And then this articles component, which goes to the articles list. And when this initially renders, it's going to make an API call here, get all these articles, and then map through them to create these teaser components. And then the teaser component is going to render with a link. And if you click that link, that should, going back to our app.js, that should route to /articles/ whatever this ID is. I'm going to change this to slug because it's going to be a slug now. We should render this article detail, which we haven't really built out yet. So what we need to do here is I want to feed this a slug. So I'm going to add another parameter here. And this is going to be based on the title. So this is very janky, but we'll do a.title. And then I think there's replace. Let me just check. Yep. Okay. So this is going to be a very quick and dirty slugify function. So replace, and I can do regex here. So that will be, I'll just do anything that's not a word. That will be replaced with a dash. I think that should work. And I'll make it global, so it'll replace all matches there. Okay, so that should work. And then in the teaser component now, the teaser component, instead of hard coding this, I can pull in the slug and make this the slug. All right, so I'm gonna uncomment this now. And let's see if that works. So go back to articles. I get the articles list, and if I hover over it, you can see that it has the very poorly done URL safe slug. So if I click here, it will take me to this, which is the article detail component, which is not actually showing anything yet. All right. So now we need to figure out this article. So we have access to, let's see, the actual article detail. Yeah, okay, anyway. So we can do article detail, should have access to that. Okay, the params. Let me just refresh that. Okay, so I have access to that. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a request, and I'm going to search based on the params here. So if I go to my API, I can add this keywords or phrase to search for. So I'll just search for the title there. I should be able to copy pretty much just copy this. So country, US, blah, 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 and then I can add the other thing. And Q equals, and then, so this will be, I think I will take the params. So the params will be a slug. So I'm gonna kind of like deslugify this. Params dot slug dot replace. I'll do the same thing basically. So I'm going to replace anything. Actually, I can just, yeah, anything which is a dash globally with a space. Slugified, and now you'll see I actually get some highlighting, but this use effect hook is now dependent on params, so I should pass that in as a dependency. Okay, so now I have access to the article. I'm going to need to create some state. So const the article set article equals state. And then I should be able to, let's see, so set article, and that will be body. I'm not sure what, it should just be a single article. It might be an array, so I should check that first. So I'm gonna console log it. And this doesn't have an ID anymore. So, all right, a lot of changes, so we'll see if that still works. So go back to articles. And if I click here, so the article detail, oh, I'm not calling it article. Okay, so it looks like that works. And then still article, so there's just one thing in the array. So I'll just grab the first thing in the array. So body dot articles, and then 0. This will be the article that I want. So article. Okay, so I've got that. Okay, so that should work. I can check the dev tools to make sure that this is coming in. So it looks like that is working. So now I can I'll add some more stuff to the detail. So I have one potential problem here is that I want to render an article, but it's not going to exist on the first render. So I can do a couple things. I'm going to do check if it's there, and if it is, then I'll render it. Otherwise, I'll do nothing. So article. article, and do double ampersand. And then I can do a bunch of JSX stuff here. So I'll just do this quickly. H2. This will be actually it might be better to do this in a function. Get. Let's do create article. Right, and then I will do H2, and that could be, what would that be? Article title. Turn that. And some other stuff. 3 author. What's some other thing we don't have yet? URL, why not? URL. We'll make that an A tag. Okay, so I think this should all be working now. So I'll go back to articles. And I pick a random one. I can see that the slug is created there. So I click it. It goes up here. And I have the title, and then I should be able to link to the actual source. All right, so I'm gonna review what just happened there. The dev tools are being wonky, not sure why. So to kind of review the whole thing, we have our app. We want part of our app to be kind of influenced by what's in the nav bar. So we have our nav component, which will always stay the same no matter what. Then we have the components inside here. So we have browser router, routes, and then the individual route components. And then depending on what the path is or what's in the URL bar, you'll go to different components. So this is just basically conditional rendering. So if my state is this, then render this component. If my state is this, render this component, and so on. So the articles list, if I go to /articles, I'm going to, on the initial render, after it finishes rendering, it's gonna call useEffect, which will make this API call, which is gonna get all these articles, and then it's gonna change my state here. And when my state changes, that's gonna trigger a re-render of this component. But this time it's going to actually have articles here. So when this gets called, I could also do conditional rendering here. Here I'm just letting it be blank, but I could do conditional rendering there as well. I'm going to call create article teasers, and it's going to map through now these articles which actually exist. It's going to create these teaser components, a whole bunch of teasers. The teasers are going to require an author, a title, and a slug. And we go to the teasers. The teaser is going to have a link, and that link is going to be a link to somewhere else in our application. So in that case, right here, so articles slash whatever, which is going to be a variable that we can access. So it's going to provide a link there. And then when we actually click on it, then our router is going to kick in and it's going to take us to the article detail component. The article detail component is going to grab that param, which we've arbitrarily called slug. It's going to grab that param, and so it's going to be available. And then it's going to render the first time, and the first time it's not going to have anything. So it's going to have this. Then basically immediately before you even notice it, it's going to make this API call. It's going to get back a bunch of articles, or actually it's going to get back a single article. This is, again, a little janky. Ideally, this request would be based on a specific ID from our database, but it will get a single article, and then when it re-rent that single article, we then change state. When state changes, this component re-renders again, this time with both params and the article information. So when it returns this will be true. This gets called, and it creates the this JSX and renders there. Lots of steps. Are there any questions about anything?
I have a question about link. Is it basically taking the inheriting the route from the component? Because I see we didn't need to specify articles slash slug. We just did the slug. So I
Yeah.
assume it inherits the route from the previous component.
It should, yeah. I don't I actually don't know the exact details of how this works. It has just worked. So I haven't had an issue with it. So I haven't really looked into it. But yeah, I mean that it definitely appears to be doing that. It starts from the base route of whatever your application is, and it looks like it's smart enough to know where it is. So it assumes, base route / articles here. I think you should also be able to pass it a full URL. So let me try. There might even be another property. Let me look. Article detail. So instead of an A tag, I'll use a link here. So back to articles. And it should work just the same. Look at the elements. So that gets translated to an A tag. If you pass it a full path, I think it will pick that up. Otherwise, I think you pass it a relative path and it assumes that.
So right there on that page in article detail, how do we have access to articles on line 15 when you just grab the article from the list of articles at 0? How is that passed in?
So right here, the body is the JSON object that we get back from our API server. And so it just happens to have a key called article.
Okay, so it's not from our previous state articles. Okay.
No. Yeah, this is just what we happen to get back from this API. So that could be anything. All right. Any more questions?
Would you be able to post this video sometime this morning? Just because it's kind of a
Yes.
lot of content, a lot of
Yeah.
stuff to cover.
Yeah.